Commissioner Root Askew, Commissioner Church,
Here.
Commissioner Kong,
Here.
Commissioner Leffel,
Here.
Commissioner Oglesby,
Here.
Commissioner Poitras,
Here.
Commissioner Snodgrass,
Here.
Commissioner Velasquez. I see her coming in, Vice Chair Craig.
It was made mention that we are going to lock the door so you couldn't get out of it.
Thank you.
And Chair Corley.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. We all join me, please, in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. General public comments, please. Anyone from the public? Items not on the agenda?
Chair Corley, no hands are raised from Zoom.
Okay, move on to our consent agenda. Do we have any members wanting to pull anything? And we can open it up for public comment.
Chair Gorley, I'd like to pull items number 3 and 4.
Let's see if we can address those first and then maybe we can get past those. Go ahead, Mary Ann.
Item number 3, and I was not here last month, but in the Budget Finance Committee of, I think it was May, we were asked to authorize a transfer of funds prior to the fiscal year end from our general litigation, from our reserve account into general litigation. And at that time, we did not feel it was appropriate to do that. We felt like we still had sufficient funds in there, and we wanted the full commission and the people that we represent to be able to see the costs through this fiscal year of what the litigation was costing us. So I was a little surprised when I saw that this was on here. And I guess a question I have, I've been sitting on a lot of boards and commissions for 25 years. I don't think I've ever seen where a contract has in there that a budget that the people will, beyond the initial and revised budget, that they consent to our attorney's withdrawal as counsel in the matter. I've never seen that on an amendment where we would be required to basically show them the money before they would agree to continue. So I went back through a whole lot of amendments on things that I've been voting on in the last couple of years. And I don't believe this was on our last amendment. I'm not even sure the amendment came forward. So I'm just asking, like, how did this come about? And do we know how much? Can we have an accounting of how much we've paid them so far and where we are on this?
Yes.
Jonathan, go ahead.
Sure. Commissioner Leffel. So this is a slightly different item than what the Budget and Finance Committee was discussing. The Budget and Finance Committee was looking at LAFCO's policy, which is to hold a litigation reserve account with a balance of approximately 300,000, which has been roughly depleted this year by about 150,000. So in lieu of making end of the fiscal year transfer, I think the direction from the committee was to not make that that transfer of fully funding that litigation reserve account to hold a fund balance of 300,000, but to do that later after the litigation was finished. So this item is just for the services to continue with the services of BBK for the litigation. So previously, the commission had approved in closed session the initial contract for 75,000, which was also extended once, I believe, in September for another 75,000. And so this would provide the additional funds to take us at least through August for the attorneys.
Through the chair, if I might
You bet.
address, I guess, Mr. Brinkman. So it says section 3 of the agreement is hereby amended to read. So how did that read before?
So
Usually if something's given to me and it's an amendment, I get to see what the changes are of what we voted on before.
yes, so the contract and the amendment were approved in closed session. We did not attach that to this item, but the current amendment reflects a similar language in the previous amendment, other than the total amount, the 225,000 was adjusted.
Mary Ann, let me jump in. Our legal staff wanted to add to that.
I will tell you, as the new attorney who's joined, I do have a copy of the original contract and the First Amendment. And so those initial clauses are exactly the same. They still have that language about withdrawal that you had identified. So I know the dollar amounts have changed in the amendments, but the actual language that was in that section is the same as in the First Amendment and in the original agreement.
Okay, and so is it also that our council will notify them in writing when 50 and 75% of the budget has been spent? Is that in the original?
Yes, it is.
I guess in LA, they do things different. I'm just not, I was floored when I actually started reading this to see what we're agreeing to. Because I don't think I've ever seen that before. And that's a lot of busy work to have to let them know when we've expended down our funds.
I should point out that the burden is on the contractor. So when they reach a certain point in billings, they have to notify LAFCO so that LAFCO doesn't fall behind in the necessity of adding items to the agenda and getting behind. And if wanting to withdraw or change representation, having enough money in the budget, ostensibly 25 or 50%. Does that make sense?
It's a pretty small contract for a lot of paperwork. So if LAFCO does not approve additional fees and expenses required, then they withdraw.
There's a series of steps that would obviously be required before an attorney can withdraw in a case. There's formal motions that have to be lodged with the court. The court has to be satisfied that doing so would not prejudice the interests of the case and justice in that case. But the purpose of what I read this amendment as doing is stating when they reach 50 or 75% of what's been budgeted or budgeted through amendment, they have to notify your staff so that staff can keep a close eye on the budget to make sure that they're not exceeding reasonable costs associated with their work. If that were probably happening, I imagine your staff may flag that, bring back a recommendation to change course. But if they're on track and on target, I would imagine, and the new budget that they're preparing is consistent with what the needs are of the case as it evolves, that staff would recommend another amendment, provided that the board is, the commission is remaining satisfied with the services it receives.
Okay. I just will say the last time when we were at 59,000, it was the Finance Budget Committee that identified that it was probably time to move more money. It wasn't anybody's attorneys and it wasn't staff. So I guess we'll all just keep our eye on it, but it just seems it's a really interesting paragraph for me. And what happened last time, because you were not here, is that we were told by council that we didn't really have to approve it, that it was the way the county did contracts, that it was an automatic kind of a rollover thing and it could just go. So this is more of a process where we're actually looking at something as opposed to rubber stamping it.
Commissioner Laffel, you also had a question on agenda 4.
Yeah, did anybody else?
Oh, did anybody else have anything?
Yeah, sure, Gordy, I just have a comment. Thank you. I just like to pull item 1 just for comment, please.
Thank you.
I'll just jump in number, I guess we're talking about 3. Same way with the consent. I just heard the attorney say that it's many challenges for our representative attorney to pull away from the case. Why do we need the word that we consent to them pulling away. Is that normally in there? Was that in the last one?
Yeah, that language about consent is in the original agreement and all the amended agreements. I don't know what the relationship that this commission has directly, but I would offer, just in my experience, when you have a client like a LAFCO that has diverse voices on the board, a outside counsel would want to make clear that although the interests on this board may not always be perfectly aligned, there's a clear way that the parties can extricate themselves from the relationship if it proves untenable. Clients do have a right to object if their attorney withdraws. So if the attorney wants to withdraw and the client refuses, that makes it harder for the court.
Anyone else on the dais? Mary Ann?
On item 4, I had a question because I saw that that staff had added under, on page 4 of item 4, under part 3, other LAFCO initiated studies. And I saw in there that Soledad has 3 that are being added, and that we're being asked to approve that the routine studies of services and boundaries of the Monterey Peninsula cities are moved to 2024. So A, Greenfield, it says it'll be completed this summer. So when will we see that study?
Okay.
Answer. Thank you. Commissioner Leffel and members of the commission, we expect to bring that study to you probably in September for a public hearing.
Okay.
And with pushing back the peninsula study, was that due to the peninsula or just our current workload?
The pushing back the time frame for the peninsula city studies is due to the additional workload of taking a look and doing a study of our Soledad area special districts.
So I guess the question I have is that we realize City of Gonzales is preparing to come in. Would we be, in anticipating that, would we be wise to go ahead and start the municipal reviews that we need for that one so that we will not delay that once it gets in?
We are prepared to begin that study any day, but there's information that it's a little bit early to begin that study, probably this fall. Part of the application package that the City of Gonzales will be providing to LAFCO will include information that's helpful to us.
That you need in order to do the study. Okay.
Yes.
That makes sense. So then I know you and I have talked about the Soledad Cemetery District and that it does need the help. What about the mission, the recreation and healthcare districts? Is this just like one big package together while you're down there, you're doing them?
Yes, by and large, that's correct. For the sense of looking for opportunities for shared services and partnerships, it's very helpful to look at a community as a whole.
Okay. And how do we notify them that you're coming?
When we're ready to begin, we'll give them a call and write letters to them as well, requesting information, letting them know that our study is beginning and requesting information, but we would be in touch with them ahead of that informally, as we were with the Greenfield area special districts and city.
Is it like 2 weeks, 1 month? How much notice do they get? I'm trying to think of other people's workloads too.
Right. We would be notifying them probably later this summer as we get closer, probably 2 to 3 months out.
Okay.
Supervisor Church, you had something?
Since we're looking at calendars, I'm just curious on 3B and 8. If there's a timeline on those.
Maybe. Darren and Jonathan, do you have information I think on Castroville, Community Services District, we expect that maybe this fall to receive it. Is that correct?
I'd say that sounds about right. And as for item B on Dolan Road, I think that is farther out on the time horizon than either item A or some of these other items under part 2 of this agenda item.
And then your other question about Salinas. Oh,
It was 3, not 3B and A, but 3B and 8 is what I meant.
B and 8.
Clear.
Number 8, Salinas Valley Health. I've had no discussions with them in the last year about any proposed annexations. Perhaps our staff have, but so that is not particularly active.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, I think we've cleaned up everything except for Commissioner Velasquez.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you. I'm gonna get this right. Okay. Thank you, Chair, for that. I have a comment, just a comment on item 1, and then also on just a discussion on item 4 for special studies. If I can just make a comment as well. So I'll start with that and then I'll go to my 1. If we can have a timeline for the reviews, I know obviously there is some additional ones for Soledad that I wasn't aware of. But if we can have a timeline for when those are going to be reviewed, and then also based on prioritization, can we have a timeline that's based on prioritization of some of the existing challenges? And that goes to my item number 1. I know that I did talk about some of the challenges that we were having with the cemetery district, some of the issues at the city council, and we heard in regards to some of those concerns. I did not see those reflected on the agenda or the minutes, and if they can please be reflected on that as an item that was brought to the LAFCO board for concern. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any members of the public wish to comment on the consent agenda items?
Gurley and commissioners, my name is Ida Lopez-Chan. I'm the CEO of the Soledad Community Healthcare District. And I am interested in item number 4. I'm glad to hear that we'll get some sort of timeline. I guess what was a going concern was that it became an emergent issue and we weren't made aware that it was one. And so we were just wanted a better understanding of what that meant to the LAFCO board. But if there's anything that we can do to support this, please let us know. We have a good healthcare district that's been around for 75 years. We're celebrating our 75th anniversary. We just opened our Women's Center, and it's a lively community organization, and it's a strong organization, and we just want to keep it that way with your guys' support. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like to recognize one of our longstanding commissioners, Craig Stevenson. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, do we have a motion on the consent?
I'll move to approve.
Oh, wait, do we have anybody online that wants to comment on our consent?
Chair, there are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have a motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
I'll just jump in for the question, Chair, if you don't mind. I did underline that same concern due to a variety of emerging concerns. And I was thinking to myself, am I the only one that did we ever get briefed on what those concerns are? And I don't think we have. And I think we need to be brought into the loop somehow down the road. You know, I don't think we'll be able to do it here within the next 15 minutes, but something needs to be prepared about what's going on and what's driving the train to put these guys in this prioritization and moving some of the peninsula cities backwards. Well, back in the timeline, and it may be a good thing. Maybe they don't have emerging issues, but as a board, we should know some of the concerns. So that's it right before the vote. That's all I have to say.
You want to answer?
Yes, just very briefly. We have, your staff have, as part of the last couple of agenda meeting packets, provided in written executive officer communications, some information about about the work program priorities. And so I'd be glad to elaborate upon that at a later meeting.
Thank you. We have a motion by Chair Left or Commissioner Lefkoe and a second by Commissioner Poitras. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed being none? We don't
We have
need a
to do
roll call
a-
vote, do we?
Nobody's moving in.
Oh, here. No.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll now move on to new business. Ag preservation and mitigation.
Thank you, Chair Gorley and members of the commission. As promised at our last month's meeting, your staff today is providing a review for you of our farmland preservation and mitigation policies and practices. These are, since its inception, more than about 60 years ago, LAFCO has had farmland preservation and mitigation as part of our mandate. And over the decades, the policies have evolved, practices have evolved. And so today we hope to provide an introduction to you, an overview of what those current policies and practices are for your information. And these matters that we'll be discussing pertain both to the policies and practices to keep farmland in active farmland mode, agricultural production to the extent possible, but also to look at what happens in the event if development is to occur on the farmland. Can there be mitigations or offsets to preserve farmland elsewhere to keep overall our county in agricultural production? So Darren's going to be running a few slides here, and we're going to be sharing a presentation. Our first slide is to highlight for you the legislative purposes that are established in the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act. These purposes have, for the most part, remained unchanged over the last 60 years since LAFCOs were created. And they address the orderly formation, growth, and development of our local governments, preservation of open space and prime farmlands, discouragement of urban sprawl, and the encouraging the efficient delivery of local government services. As you can see, these purposes cover a wide range of activities and needs for our local communities. They run the gamut, and agricultural land preservation is one part of that basic and fundamental legislative purpose. We as LAFCO have been carrying out these responsibilities in cooperative partnerships with our cities and with the County of Monterey to allow communities to grow and to meet their various needs with respect to regional housing needs allocations, the needs for employment and economic development, the needs to deliver efficient governmental services, and to deliver other needs required by residents of both the cities and the unincorporated areas. The map on this slide highlights some of the 20 city annexations that LAFCO has approved since 2000 in the Salinas Valley. Approximately 5,000 acres, or nearly 8 square miles, have been annexed to these 5 cities. About 80% of the lands that have been annexed in the Salinas Valley over the last 23 years have have stayed in an unbuilt condition. That is, they're undeveloped to date, but plans are underway to actually develop a lot of this land that has been brought inside city limits. In addition, our LAFCO has approved an additional 3,200 acres or nearly 5 square miles of land to be added to the city's spheres of influence between 2008 and 2014. And almost all of that sphere of influence territory has remained undeveloped to date. The primary point of this slide is to help explain that LAFCO approvals have added a large amount of land to the inventory of available land for our cities to develop and meet various needs. And LAFCO has been part of the overall solution of meeting the overall needs of our communities in Monterey County. The next slide highlights some provisions from the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act that pertain to the responsibilities of LAFCO with respect to farmlands. In addition to discouraging urban sprawl and preserving open space and prime agricultural lands, the Commission is responsible for balancing the preservation of those lands, of the agricultural lands, which is a state interest, with the promotion of orderly development. In addition, the state law requires that our LAFCO adopt local policies that encourage and provide for planned, well-ordered, efficient urban development patterns with appropriate consideration to preserve open space and agricultural lands within those patterns. LAFCO's agricultural policies, formal policy dates back to 1979, and following a public hearing process in 2010, the current version was adopted. Our next slide addresses some of the key aspects of the current policy, and a copy of that is attached to your staff report, which is agenda item number 6 in the meeting packet. The full, along with the packet also includes a 1-page summary of the full range of policies that are considered by the Commission and staff when we are considering a city sphere of influence amendment or annexation proposal. That's attachment 3 in the staff report. The fundamental policy approach of Monterey LAFCO is to identify LAFCO's broad legislative mandates regarding agricultural lands. For example, the need to balance the state's interest in preserving farmland with the need for orderly development. And also to require applicants to explain how their proposal is consistent with the mandates. If the proposal is not consistent with the mandates, then the proposal is held in, or if there is not a satisfactory explanation, then the proposal is held in incomplete status until the application can adequately address the agricultural preservation related questions, or the application is denied by the Commission. The policy is intentionally not specific. It does not provide guidance on mitigation timing or mechanisms such as conservation easements, in lieu fee payments to a land trust, etc. It's also not specific on mitigation ratios. It is written this way with the intention that it provides some flexibility for the Commission. Flexibility for the proposed mitigation to respond to site-specific circumstances, also flexibility for LAFCO's requirements and practices to evolve over time. That is, changes in approaches, priorities, changes in innovative practices. The policy is regarded as really as a living document to provide general guidance. And now, with Darren's assistance, we're going to move into some of the specific implementation practices that our LAFCO follows to carry out the core mandates and local policies.
Thank you, Kate. This next slide provides an overview of the main elements of LAFCO's hands-on practices in implementing agricultural mitigation. Because LAFCO's adopted policy is intentional in providing high-level guidance rather than specific direction on ag mitigation details, as Kate was just describing. The specific actions that LAFCO has carried out in recent decades are really a matter of practices that have developed over the years, as opposed to simply implementing requirements that the policy has already identified, which is not the case. As we just heard, this commission's adopted policy doesn't actually identify any specific requirements. It provides broad direction. So looking at Monterey LAFCO's practices regarding ag mitigation, staff's view is that there have been three main elements in applying ag mitigation to city annexations of farmland. The first one is timing. LAFCO's practice is to require agricultural mitigation at the time of annexation. Since 2010, this has been a consistent practice of this commission to require specific ag mitigation actions be identified, proposed, and fully carried out as a condition of approval that must be satisfied before staff can record the annexation's certificate of completion and put the annexation into effect. The specific actions typically involve permanent conservation easements on specific sites that were previously identified and evaluated as part of the annexation process. Basically identify those easements, finalize them, sign them, record them, and provide documentation to LAFCO staff to be able to proceed with the certificate of completion is essentially how that process has generally worked. This practice's origins are in the late 1990s with the Yanks Air Museum Sphere of Influence Amendment that was approved for the city of Greenfield in 2000, and also with the Myers Mills annexation to King City, which was approved in 2002. So it is a practice that goes way back, but it is also the case that apart from those two early examples, it doesn't appear that agricultural mitigation was specifically or consistently tied to the annexation process again until 2010. And for that could be for various reasons, but LAFCO has not always required ag mitigation to occur as part of the LAFCO process. And there were approximately a dozen or so annexations between 2000 and 2010 that do not appear to have included ag mitigation as a LAFCO requirement directly tied to the LAFCO process. The second element on this slide has to do with the mechanism for carrying out ag mitigation. It has generally been achieved through the property owner directly placing conservation easements on specific sites, as we discussed a moment ago. These are sites typically that either the property owner proposing the annexation already owns or by arrangement to buy a conservation easement on someone else's lands somewhere in the area. There is an alternative of paying an in lieu fee to a land trust to fund future conservation easements, acquisition of easements by the land trust at a later date. However, in LAFCO's experience, there has only been one instance of a property owner opting to use this alternative. That was for an approximately 35-acre annexation to Greenfield about 3 years ago. There also has been one instance of ag mitigation being accomplished by transferring full ownership of an agricultural property, not just a conservation easement, but the full ownership of the property to a land trust. And this was done, again, one time in the recent past as part of the 2010 Unicool annexation to the city of Salinas. The third and last element on this slide has to do with mitigation ratios. In LAFCO's body of practice and implementation, farmland mitigation, when it has occurred directly as part of a LAFCO process, has generally occurred in a range between 1-to-1 and 2-to-1, meaning somewhere between 1 and 2 acres of mitigation being provided for each acre of farmland that's annexed for future development. And again, it's a range depending on the circumstances of the land being annexed and how the agricultural mitigation is being provided. And on this next slide, so this slide, this is the one slide that was not part of your packet before you today. So this was just added today. But this slide shows the details of the ag mitigation that has occurred as part of the LAFCO process. So here, basically, we have 7 situations where LAFCO has required ag mitigation between 2000 and 2022 in direct connection to an approval before LAFCO. So here we have 6 annexations and 1 sphere amendment. These LAFCO approvals added approximately 1,645 total acres to the cities and involved a little over 2,000 acres of agricultural mitigation. So that's an approximately 1 to 1.25 or 1.25 to 1 overall ratio. But it's very important to note here that not all of the annexed land was prime farmland or any kind of farmland. Probably the vast majority of it was, but the actual that total acreage included other types of lands as well. And so taking that into account, the actual farmland, the actual number of farmland acres that were, I should say the actual ratio reflecting mitigation to acres of farmland is probably closer to 1.5 to 1. But all we know for sure is that the ag mitigation total to the total acreage was about 1.25 to 1. The most recent LAFCO decision implementing LAFCO's policies and practices is the Commission's approval of the 654-acre Miramonte Sphere of Influence Amendment and annexation to the city of Soledad 6 months ago in December of last year. The Commission's decision and final resolution included an annexation condition of approval shown here on this slide. Most notably, this condition of approval requires ag mitigation to be identified and fully carried out to the LAFCO executive officer's satisfaction before the annexation can be recorded and put into effect, as we were discussing as a general practice just a few minutes ago. The condition of approval also emphasizes direct placement of conservation easements in strategic locations that will help establish and reinforce long-term city growth boundaries. But the condition of approval also recognizes the possibility of paying in lieu fee, paying those fees if appropriate conservation easement receiver sites turn out to be unavailable. This December 2022 condition of approval does not include any discussion or guidance as to mitigation ratios. The current status of this condition of approval is that discussions with city staff, property owner representatives, and the Ag Land Trust are active and ongoing, including a meeting that we had last week. The main proposed mitigation site continues to be a location about 2 miles north of the main part of the city, near the Soledad prisons that the city and property owners had proposed as part of the LAFCO public hearings last year. And currently city staff, including the new city manager, are taking an active role in gathering information, exploring possible alternative sites, and they're truly making a concerted effort to effectively address this condition of approval. Staff is committed to working with the city and will keep the commission informed about the status of this important proposal. And in the meantime, the Sphere of Influence Amendment, adding the full site to the city's sphere, took effect immediately in December and does not require any further action. One relatively recent factor in LAFCO's considerations of how to implement ag mitigation is the development of memorandums of agreement, or MOAs, between the Salinas Valley cities and the County of Monterey. I say relatively recent. These MOAs, the development of these MOAs does go back 7 to 10 years now, but on the other hand, we've only had a few city annexations of farmland since that time. So the existence of these MOAs in relation to LAFCO's practice is a relatively new phenomenon still, I'd say. The city of Greenfield, excuse me just a minute. I should go back and mention that during the December 2022 public hearings for the Miramonte proposal that we were just discussing, city staff and the property owners had spoken against the idea of LAFCO requiring ag mitigation as part of the annexation. The city's application and city's presentations and comments at the meetings had consistently proposed that the city itself would take responsibility for implementing ag mitigation through the city's own permitting processes after the annexation is complete, which is in keeping with provisions in this 2016 MOA between the city of Soledad and the county. Just for context, the city of Greenfield had first entered into a similar MOA with the county in 2007, and that document was finalized and signed in 2013. And then Gonzalez had then entered into a similar agreement with the county in 2014. So those two things happened in pretty quick succession. But looking a little further back, the city of Salinas had also entered into growth agreements with the county going as far back as the late 70s. And Salinas and the county adopted the current version of their agreement in 2006. And it was subsequently amended in 2019 and possibly one other time after 2019. LAFCO is also a signatory to the 2013 Greenfield Memorandum, but not to the other agreements mentioned on this slide I would just mention. And just kind of taking a step back and looking at what these MOAs did, they've made very important advances by establishing greater certainty as to where and how the cities would grow in the future. And very importantly, they identified preferred directions of growth for future city growth and directed that growth away from best farmlands. Looking specifically at the ag mitigation provisions of these MOAs, and especially at the more recent MOAs, this group at the top of the slide from 2013 to 2016, these agreements anticipate a central concept of these agreements, I should mention, is that they anticipated development of a county-wide agricultural mitigation program that would in the future provide a comprehensive approach to implementing ag mitigation all throughout the county in a strategic, effective, and uniform way. And the basic goal there, the central idea was there to be, for there to be one unified program that the County of Monterey and all the cities would jointly develop and sign on to. However, the MOAs also did provide an alternative to that path, which was for an alternative for each city to develop its own comprehensive city-specific ag mitigation program. And lastly, until such time as one or both of those things happened, the MOAs did provide for the city to carry out ag mitigation at its own discretion on a one-to-one basis. In summary, just kind of wrap up this topic regarding the MOAs. The 2013 to 2016 MOAs provided a path for the cities to take the lead on identifying and carrying out ag mitigation. But LAFCO's general practice has been that agricultural mitigation should occur as part of the annexation process rather than later on down the line through city processes in the future after annexation. So that fact basically creates kind of a fundamental tension between LAFCO's practices and the provisions within those MOAs. This next slide outlines an additional factor having to do with ag mitigation, which is that over the last several years, and particularly since summer of 2022, last year, county staff has been working diligently to develop an agricultural mitigation program and ordinance that will establish specific criteria and mitigation requirements for projects that will impact farmland resources. County staff is developing a preliminary draft ordinance. Currently, as we speak, they're in the process of developing that draft in consultation with a subcommittee of the county's Ag Advisory Committee. City staff is participating in the process along with representatives of the agricultural industry, developers, LAFCO staff, and other interested groups and stakeholders. This effort will be in a preliminary draft stage with the subcommittee at least through August, is the current indications before proceeding to the County Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors. Therefore, at this time, we currently can't know for sure what the county's final ordinance will include or require, and we also don't know yet to what extent the Salinas Valley cities will ultimately want to and opt to adopt the county program's main provisions into their own city policies and practices in the long term. But at the moment, the MOA's broad goal of a single unified and agreed to approach among the county and the cities doesn't appear to be coming together with the full scope that was hoped for when the MOAs were crafted, and the county's ordinance instead seems to be taking shape as something that will apply to projects taking place in the unincorporated county under county permitting jurisdiction, at least for now. On a similar timeline, while the county has been developing its ordinance, some of the cities have begun establishing their own ordinances and standards for how ag mitigation should take place within their jurisdictions, or how the cities would like it to take place. For example, most recently, the city of Gonzales adopted a citywide ag mitigation ordinance specific to the city of Gonzales very recently in April of this year. And the city of Soledad, on a somewhat similar lines, adopted a Miramonte specific ag mitigation plan that actually came before this commission last year as part of the public hearings for the Miramonte annexation. It should be, I should pause here to note that the commission has and will continue to have the discretion to decide when and how to require ag mitigation in relation to any given application to LAFCO, but both of these recent city actions, along with those provisions in the MOAs themselves, which I mentioned just a minute ago, clearly signal that the cities would like to take responsibility and authority for how agricultural mitigation requirements should apply within their communities, including for annexations, adding land to their communities, and this increasing desire on the part of the cities to take the lead on ag mitigation may be something that the commission will want to kind of consider or weigh in the balance in the future as we move forward and consider future annexation proposals. Okay, we're getting towards the end of these kind of heavier slides here, but turning to a consideration of LAFCO's policies and practices alongside the county's preliminary draft ordinance and, for example, the ordinance that the city of Gonzales just adopted a couple of months ago. It brings into focus some fundamentally important specific areas for consideration, which are summarized here on this slide, some of which we've already touched on here today, but are worth looking at in a little more detail as we start wrapping up here today. The first of these, again, this has to do with timing, the timing of carrying out agricultural mitigation. As we discussed, Monterey LAFCO's practice is that this commission's interpretation of LAFCO's ag land protection responsibilities under this Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act that mandates from the state legislature is that ag mitigation needs to be proposed and fully implemented at the annexation stage, either as part of the annexation proposal when it comes to LAFCO or as a condition of LAFCO approval, as opposed to under a city's permitting process following annexation and possibly years in the future, either at a final subdivision map or building permit stage. There are reasons for this, for LAFCO's practices. Beginning with requiring ag mitigation as part of LAFCO's annexation approval process does provide certainty to the commission and to the public as to the specific ag mitigation actions that will occur in response to LAFCO's adopted policies and legislative mandates. It also places those actions into effect immediately instead of at a later date when mitigation sites could be more expensive and harder to obtain, or when lands may no longer be designated by the state as prime farmland and therefore possibly no longer subject to ag mitigation requirements. We've seen and learned over the years in some of our research that the staff has found out that being undesignated, or not sure if that's a word, but de-designated by the state as prime farmland can happen in as little as 4 years after a site is no longer being irrigated or farmed. So there is some advantage to having the mitigation occur sooner rather than later. However, both the county's current preliminary draft ordinance and the adopted 2023 Gonzales citywide ordinance, as well as the City of Soledad's 2022 plan for Miramonte last year. Basically, all of these things are more aligned with or more oriented to the city proposing to carry out ag mitigation at the final subdivision map stage, or which could take place years after an initial decision has been made that would commit farmland to urban development. And I know I said city just now, but similarly, the county's preliminary draft ordinance, the way it's currently written, also proposes to have ag mitigation occur at the final map stage, which could be years in the future after this decision has been made to approve a project or to change a land use designation from agriculture to some other type of use. So again, the concern is that there are potential unintended consequences that could occur if ag mitigation is put off to a later stage of development. The second topic on this slide has to do with potential exemptions or exceptions from ag mitigation requirements. LAFCO's practice has been to require ag mitigation for all annexed acreage of prime farmland and farmland of statewide significance. In other words, the practice has been to not provide for any exemptions or exceptions. And again, there are reasons for this. For example, at the time when an annexation is being proposed and approved by LAFCO, there may be land uses that are identified as being the anticipated future uses for that site. But there have been cases where the actual land uses that take place when development occurs, which again could be years in the future, in some cases might be quite different, or in some cases the land use is not necessarily identified at the time of annexation. One example of this basic concept is with the Unicool annexation to the city of Salinas in 2010, that was being proposed and brought forward as being a very much agriculturally oriented cooling and or packing facility for agricultural products. Ultimately the company that was intending to use that site decided to opt for a different location in a different city, and so the agriculture oriented land use that had been planned for that site kind of went away. And in the intervening time, there have been different proposals for, I think, possibly an Amazon distribution center or other types of uses that are not agriculturally related. And again, the concern there is that if we have exceptions that are based on the type of land use that is being anticipated, one possible complication there is that the land use that actually gets developed years down the road might be something quite different. Also, similarly, it may not be possible or feasible to accurately estimate the acreage of the affordable housing component of an annexation until the development gets closer to being built and a more specific mix of unit types is known. So there's the concern there that if there were to be an exception from needing to do agricultural mitigation based on, for example, a specific amount of affordable housing that is planned as part of a project, it may not, even though a number of the housing units might be subject to affordability requirements, that doesn't mean that that same corresponding acreage is the amount of land that would need to be available for that housing. So it can be difficult to quantify, how some of these exceptions might work as a practical matter. That being said, the commission has the discretion to exempt part or all of an annexation from ag mitigation requirements on a case-by-case basis, depending on specific circumstances, such as deed restrictions or something along those lines that could provide more certainty as to what will be developed on the site after annexation occurs. But there are legitimate reasons not to carve out exemptions in general with regard to LAFCO's process. In contrast to that practice of LAFCO, both the county's preliminary draft ordinance and the city of Gonzalez's adopted ordinance do provide exceptions for certain types of land uses. The main examples at this point being affordable housing, parks and open space, city projects, and processing facilities for agricultural products. Okay, and the last topic on this slide, again, has to do with mitigation ratios. LAFCO's approved annexations have required a range of 1-to-1 to 2-to-1, depending on the sites receiving the conservation easements, instead of establishing 1-to-1 or some other fixed ratio as the standard to be met. Earlier versions of the County of Monterey's preliminary draft ordinance did identify a 2-to-1 proposed mitigation ratio, and that's still under discussion, but in the current draft, this subject does remain a subject of discussion and is under development. The city of Gonzalez's adopted ordinance from April of this year does appear to require a 1-to-1 ratio, although it does not state it outright. And wording as we discussed before, wording in the 2013 to 2016 city county MOAs also specified a 1-to-1 ratio as an interim measure until adoption of a citywide or countywide program. So we do have several potentially conflicting reference points when it comes to mitigation ratios, but staff would recommend retaining flexibility on the mitigation ratio as a means to incentivize placing easements on high-value locations where easements can achieve the most benefit by channeling growth into desired directions, and also as a means of protecting lands that are subject to the most development pressure. Looking ahead to current and future LAFCO applications involving ag mitigation, these items here on the slide somewhat speak for themselves, but the slide demonstrates that applying agricultural mitigation policies and practices to current and future city annexations is going to continue to be very relevant to LAFCO's work in the foreseeable future. Specifically with the city of Soledad, the Miramonte 654-acre annexation approved by this commission in December with that condition of approval. Again, the sphere of it, but for the ag mitigation, or for the annexation, ag mitigation remains under discussion and incomplete at this time, although staff is working with the city and other interested parties. Progress is being made, and we expect, or I should say it's possible that the city will be coming to this commission soon to request a time extension. Basically, when LAFCO approves an annexation, there is a standard 1-year timeline or deadline, I should say, under state law, in which the annexation either has to be completed or has to be there needs to be a time extension granted by the commission. So I think in the next coming weeks to a month or two, I think the city is planning to make a decision as to whether they will be planning to request an extension. At the same time, in terms of things we have or things that are in progress and being worked on right now, there's an annexation to the city of Gonzalez that was filed just last year for an agricultural cooling plant on approximately 45 acres within the city's existing sphere of influence. And the city and property owners are currently voluntarily proposing ag mitigation consistent with LAFCO's practices, although it is not a requirement of the city's own processes. And that is an application that is currently under review and should be coming to this commission within the next several months. And then looking ahead, we have a couple of important matters anticipated for next year. One has to do with Target Area K as a potential sphere amendment and annexation to the city of Salinas. And the other major item that's on the radar right now has to do with the Vista Lucia annexation that this commission has discussed in the past over the last few years, an annexation to the city of Gonzales of lands that are within the city's sphere of influence. And that project could consist of approximately up to approximately 3,500 residential units on almost 800 acres. So again, these are some of the things that we see coming before this commission in the foreseeable future that will involve ag mitigation in one form or another. This concludes staff's review of LAFCO's policies and practices regarding agricultural mitigation. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to our executive officer for any closing comments. And then I think we will take it from there as far as public comment and commissioner discussion.
Thank you, Darren. And Chair, members of the commission, I hope that you can see from this presentation that LAFCO really is part of the solution. All of our communities are meeting very pressing and urgent needs. There are competing needs and priorities. And part of LAFCO's responsibility is to balance those competing public needs and priorities. We have been very active, or our commission has been active in accomplishing the legislative purposes set out for it in state law and under our local policies. We have been very successful in adding significant amounts of land to the available land supply for each of our cities in the Salinas Valley. We have been effective at ensuring that municipal services can efficiently be delivered to those annexed areas. And we have been able to provide meaningful permanent protection of farmland. So all of those have been accomplished with the package of policies, laws, and practices that you have discussed today. The recommended action for this item is to receive and discuss the presentation that you've heard. So we're very, we welcome your questions, your discussion today. No further action is requested or recommended by your staff. Looking ahead to the next steps, as Darren has mentioned, we are actively working with the City of Soledad and our new city manager, Megan Hunter, in the audience here to address condition compliance for the Miramonte annexation. That's one of our highest priorities, is to assist the city in complying with that condition and getting the annexation recorded. So in the coming next couple of months, the city may be along those lines requesting an extension of the annexation approval to allow additional time from the commission to satisfy that condition. In addition, your staff is working closely right now with the City of Gonzales. The city, as we had mentioned in our report last month to you, the city of Gonzales has submitted an application to us for an agricultural cooler project, an annexation project at the south end of their town by Gloria Road. And that does include a voluntary agricultural mitigation measure. That application is actively under review right now by your staff, and we expect it will be ready or may be ready to come to your commission as early as September for a public hearing and action. As a fairness matter, we do not believe that it would be appropriate to have a discussion right now about policy alternatives. As mentioned, we do have this very active condition compliance underway for this with City of Soledad for that condition of approval related to ag mitigation. And if there is to be such a discussion, it would be appropriate in our view to defer that until after we have been able to execute that annexation and get it past the finish line. So that completes my presentation and Darren's. So thank you again, and we're here for your questions and any comments.
I'll open it up for our commission questions, and then we'll open it up for public comment, then back to the commission. Any commission questions? Commissioner Velasquez.
I have a question. I just want to thank you for Jonathan for all the information that was provided. I just need some clarity in terms of the different layers of approval. And it stated that obviously some of our cities have an MOU. And so does that MOU, and in that MOU, if we have certain policies in regards to ratios, does that supersede what the LAFCO policy state?
I would say that the existence of a city-county MOA is really a factor for LAFCO to consider. I don't think it's a matter of one superseding the other. It's all things that with respect to a specific provision, such as a mitigation ratio or something along those lines. It's not binding on LAFCO. It is. I would suggest that it's something for the commission and staff to consider as a factor in the overall balance of how to determine how ag mitigation should apply to any particular proposal.
Jonathan, thank you for that. So it does come back. So thank you for clarifying. It doesn't supersede, but obviously this commission would take a look at that with other factors in regards to what's within the MOAs that exist, and also some of the other factors that may impede us doing something differently other than the 1-to-1 ratios, correct?
I think that's accurate. I don't know if our executive officer would have any different take on it or anything different, something else to consider. But I think that what you've the way you've laid it out, Commissioner, I think is accurate.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commissioners?
Just on the ag mitigation rates, I think are generally 1.1 to 2.1. I guess there's some variations outside of that. And in terms of in lieu fees, do we visit? I didn't hear that addressed by as a alternative and in the past, I should say.
Commissioner, as we discussed in our presentation, the 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 is a general range that has been applied by LAFCO. Sometimes there is no mitigation, and occasionally there is more than 2-to-1 as a mitigation ratio, very occasionally. particularly for a couple of annexations for the city of Greenfield. And I'm sorry, what was the rest? Oh, with regard to in lieu fee payments, to date in the annexations that have required ag mitigation, only one of those has included an in lieu fee payment. All of the others have been for either agricultural conservation easements that are permanent protection, or in one case, fee title owned by an agricultural land trust. The agricultural in lieu fee was applied for one small annexation in the city of Greenfield.
Just to follow up a little bit on, and those fees are presented at all up front.
That is correct. In that particular case, it was a 35-acre annexation. And there was an in lieu fee payment made of approximately $125,000. And that payment was received by a local agricultural land trust prior to recordation of the annexation.
And just to go back one more time onto the mitigation rates. We don't ask for anything more than would be really 2 to 1, except for some extraordinary circumstances, it sounds like, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I just have a quick question with regard to a situation where an annexation took place where there was no mitigation required. I don't recall that ever happening as far as my experience is concerned. Have we done that before, and when? I'm just curious.
Darren has a more detailed records, but there was a period in the early 2000s when some of the annexations were approved with no mitigations being directly required by LAFCO. So part of the reason probably is that through the city's own CEQA process, that mitigations were identified. We're a little bit, our record isn't particularly clear on that. But prior to that patch of that pattern, there were historically a couple of very large annexations where mitigation was required by this commission, both for the particularly for the Myers Mills ranches.
So to follow up, it's been 20 plus years since we've approved an annexation that didn't require mitigation. Is that right?
The consistent requirement is more from the period of about 2010 forward, for the last roughly 12 years.
Okay.
And before that, it was a little bit more choppy.
And I know you don't have a list in front of you, but can you give me an example of when or what the situation was where LAFCO approved an annexation without any mitigation requirements?
We do have that information at hand.
Just an example of some of those situations would be the Mirabel 1 annexation of about 100 acres to the city of Soledad. There was also the Creek Bridge annexation to Soledad in 2002. I'm sorry, Mirabel 1 was in 2001. Creek Bridge annexation to Greenfield was in 2002. That was approximately 100 acres. Frankly, there were quite a few annexations around 2001 to 2006 or so, smaller annexations or, kind of medium-sized-ish annexations to the Salinas Valley cities. And staff hasn't been able to find anything in the file indicating that there was ag mitigation required by LAFCO and specifically tied to LAFCO's approval. There may have been an ag mitigation that occurred, as Kate had said, through the city's environmental review process or through some other kind of negotiations with the county or something along those lines. But in terms of ag mitigation being specifically directed by LAFCO or required by LAFCO and tied to LAFCO's approval, that occurred with the main examples from the early 2000s are the city's the sphere of influence amendment for Yanks Air Museum to Greenfield, and then the Myers Mills annexation to King City in 2002. And then there was kind of a gap there between 2002 and 2010 where we're not readily finding ag mitigation tied to a LAFCO approval. But then kind of getting to what you were asking about, Commissioner, since 2010, it has been LAFCO's consistent practice that annexations of farmland to the cities in the Salinas Valley has been tied to a requirement for ag mitigation to be identified and carried out. The one exception to that was, I think, around 2017 or 18, when LAFCO approved an annexation of about 45 acres to the city of Soledad. And that was land that had been farmland at one time. It was no longer being farmed. It was no longer designated as prime farmland. It was kind of a remnant piece that the city and county agreed should not be subject to ag mitigation requirements. And ultimately, LAFCO staff and commission also adopted that recommendation and did not impose any ag mitigation requirement for that specific project. Other than that, since 2010, the consistent practice has been, yes, to require ag mitigation at the time of annexation.
Thank you, Darren.
Commissioner Leffel?
I have several, so bear with me. Kate, I have that article from the Weekly from May 23rd, and it clearly states that LAFCO says, which would be you, I believe, saying it, that the ordinance does not basically is not in line with the robust standards that LAFCO has, which are 2-to-1. So I'm hearing today that it could be like no mitigation, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, but yet it's here. Did they misquote you? For accurate representation, you would want to refer Commissioner back to a letter dated March 31st, 2023, signed by me, sent to the mayor of Gonzales, pertaining to the proposed ag cooler project that we now have received for annexation. And all of our exact language is in there. And so you'll find that opinion piece that was written in that paper was written by a journalist for dramatization purposes and does not reflect what's in the letter. That's all that journalist was referring to, and there were no flat out statements in that letter about even 2-to-1. That is an aspirational goal, and sometimes it's met and often it is not.
Commissioner Craig?
And I think, just before
If I may just clarify real quick, there was a provision in that letter that encouraged the city of Gonzales to consider pausing their current effort to develop an ordinance and to look instead to participating more directly or focus on participating in the county's development of a draft ordinance, which at that time, at that particular version of the county's ordinance, was proposing a 2-to-1 mitigation standard as a starting point for potential reductions based on proximity to an urban or an unincorporated community or rural center or those kinds of designations that the county has. So again, that 2-to-1 discussion point is back under discussion and development between among staff and the county's subcommittee that is developing that draft ordinance. But at the time of our letter, that was what was in the county's draft.
Okay, but
I have the letter pulled up if you'd like for me to read, just to help answer the question. So this was in the staff report for the April meeting. It says, as written, the proposed city, this is for the city of Gonzales, to the mayor. As written, the proposed city ordinance does not appear to be coordinated with the more robust agricultural preservation and mitigation standards drafted by the county. For example, the county's preliminary draft ordinance would require applicants to attempt to secure nearby permanent economic conservation easements as the preferred agricultural mitigation strategy before allowing payment of in lieu fees. The county's preliminary draft would also require 2-to-1 mitigation for designated prime farmland that is being converted to urban uses. City's draft ordinance does not appear to include these features. And it's my understanding that LAFCO has been participating in the draft farmland ordinance at 2-to-1, which is supporting that discussion as they're writing the letter to Gonzalez.
Go
Chair,
ahead.
Chair Gorley, I definitely stand behind the letter, the contents of that letter. And yes, we are participating in the city's process with the subcommittee of its agricultural advisory committee. And the county's agricultural ordinance draft does reference 2-to-1, and that is well within the range of the practices of this commission over the last 25 years. So everything cited in that letter is information that I fully stand behind.
Commissioner Velasquez.
Go ahead. No.
Just on that note, I just want to comment also in terms of the subcommittee that is undertaking the ag mitigation plan and their phases. And my understanding obviously is that there's been ongoing discussions, but I think it's really critical that the Salinas Valley cities are included in those discussions as stakeholders. And I don't know if at the beginning how the county sent out their emails or information or communications. But as we know, especially in terms of the ag mitigation that really impacts the Salinas Valley, because we are the cities that are surrounded by agriculture, it is imperative that the cities are part of that discussion to be able to comment on some of the conversations that the county is having in regards to the ag mitigation ratios and, so forth and so on.
Commissioner Leffel, did you have anything else to follow up on? Okay.
So, Darren, I believe I heard you say that there was a instance where it was 1 to 1.25. Was that the average over a period of time?
Yeah, the total average ratio between of all the boundary changes, annexations and sphere amendment actions, the 7 actions that LAFCO has taken implementing ag mitigation requirements in conjunction with those boundary changes, the total ratio averaged across all of those is 1.125 to 1, 1.25 to 1 if you look at the total acreage that was being annexed. But if you were to look at the acreage that was annexed that's actually designated as farmland, which we don't have the numbers developed that closely or that finely at a fine grain, but staff's sense is that if you were to look only at the farmland acreage and do the mitigation and calculate the mitigation ratio on that basis, which is normally how mitigation is calculated, then it would probably be closer to 1.5 to 1. But again, that's our best estimate.
Okay, so also what I thought I heard you say, key policy practice considerations on, I don't know what slide number this is, 10, that there are mitigation ratios given to affordable housing, open space parks and recreation, city projects. Does that also include educational, like new high school, new type of educational, or is that just pure government?
Well, through the chair, Commissioner, LAFCO's practices have been to not create those exemptions or exceptions. The idea of having exemptions or exceptions from standard agricultural mitigation practices is really something that has come into play in the last year or so in the discussions of the county's ordinance and the preliminary draft ordinance, I should say, and the city of Gonzalez's ordinance. Those two ordinances do provide for exceptions. The details of those exceptions I don't have that information at hand, but those examples that I listed on the slide are the main representative examples of what the county's draft ordinance and the city of Gonzales's adopted ordinance provide for as far as exceptions. I don't think they're intended to include public schools. I think they're talking about city public infrastructure projects and those other examples that I listed there. But in the end, it would all be based on, the deciding, the details of, whether that exception would apply or not would really be in the context of the city's ordinance.
Okay.
And
And
the
the
county's
last
process.
thing I thought I heard was ag-related business. So for instance,
Yes.
your example of Unicool, the Unicool was agricultural land that was initially to be used for agricultural business practices. So there's a lot here, a lot. And back to Mayor Velasquez, the just of how things work. I think on slide number 7, and I know that both Commissioner Poitras and I have been at special districts meetings where I think it was stated that Soledad needs that the final decision on this is our executive officer. That when it comes back, it does not come back to the full commission of did they achieve what the commission voted that they should do, but that it is basically they sit down for however many years it takes. And eventually, if they're lucky, they'll get approval from the executive officer, but it never comes back to the full commission for any discussion of there would be, I don't know, any mitigation or any piece carved out for a city project or anything like that. It's just, and I made the motion, so I'm fully aware of the motion that we didn't want in lieu of fees, but I want to understand that once the commission says go on something, that no matter how long it gets drawn out, it never comes back to the commission. Then it's fully with staff. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, Commissioner Leffel, that is correct. That condition of approval is one in which the commissioners delegated that responsibility to your executive officer. And in terms of actions to date on that particular condition, we did receive in May of this year, just a month ago, a proposal from the city to satisfy that condition. And we then met with the city manager and staff to discuss that twice now in the last month. But the proposal that we received in May was almost identical to the one that was rejected by this commission last December. And so there is still quite a bit of discussion that needs to happen in collaboration in order to accomplish and implement this condition. And we are committed to working with the city of Soledad and in order to accomplish that.
Well, we also do have a sunset clause where the city has to come back to us for an extension. And at that time, we could also put it back, that it comes back before this commission.
The sunset clause is that under the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act, that the approval or the decision by the commission would expire in 1 year. And that's why we're working now with the city leadership to come back to you to request an extension of time. However, in doing so, that does not open up that condition for renegotiation.
So if they did not come, well, we're getting kind of off track here. So, okay, anything else from the commission?
Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
To the chair? Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Leffel, for pointing that out. I think for me, just going through this process now, and I know it was a discussion we had the last meeting where you weren't here in terms of the ag mitigation and for the South County cities, the Salinas Valley cities. I know it's something that we've been looking at in terms of our growth patterns. But for me, it was just enlightening that some of these conversations that we're having now, we weren't having before then in December, because that's when it should have happened. And so I think for me, understanding that at least for what was approved, it has been approved, but moving forward, I think it's really important because we have a lot of other growth within the Salinas Valley cities. And we want to make sure that we're having this discussion and we're really taking into account what is an exemption, what can be, what are the ratios, and what is really feasible for the cities given what we're surrounded with. So I think for us now having this discussion is good. But being able to implement policies that are really going to be feasible for moving forward and allowing the cities to continue to look at, implementing what's in the Cortese-Hertzberg-Knox Act, but also looking at what's in our MOAs and also commenting on what the county is proposing in terms of their ag mitigation also. So, I think for me, that's really critical that those conversations are being had.
Okay. Can I open it up for public comment and then bring it back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, are the cities represented at this conversation with the county? We need to make sure they're at the table. Either they are or they're not, but then when they get to LAFCO, they have to be represented. They are surrounded by ag land. So to sit up here and talk about how they're going to figure out this ratio. And my next question is, who figures out the ratio? It was just said a minute ago that we've been following this policy consistently for the last 25 years. But then Darren said between 2002 and 2010, we were not requiring any mitigation. So it's a little disconnect there. You said consistently that we were not asking for any mitigation until roughly 2010. And so the point is, as a LAFCO, we should know what we're asking the communities to do. And we should support that policy one way or the other. My point is we should talk about the policy and adopt a policy and understand what it is as that relates to this part of it. LAFCO is always going to stay part of this growth. There's the laws there. So the question is not how well LAFCO has been doing over the last, I guess it was 69, 79. That's not the question. The question is, what is this current board doing about facilitating the orderly growth of sphere influences that cities want to do? What are we doing about that? I don't think we just leave it up to, with all respect to our wonderful staff, I don't think the board leaves that up to the staff to figure that out and tell us at the end of the process, this is what's happening, this is what they decided, and then we either say yes or no, and then we're left to explain to the community, we don't know what the mitigation ratio is. We don't know how you got between one and one and the goal of 2 to 1. Who picks that? When is it done? When is it appropriate not to have any? And I just heard a minute ago the county is talking about 2 to 1. And we're saying there's no exceptions. And then we're figuring out what type of hole we're in once the community comes to us and say, this cannot be met. We cannot grow properly. And then for me, I'm sitting up there saying, well, why are people sleeping two families to a single family home? Why am I required to go up 4 or 5 stories and increase density? It has to be natural growth throughout the community, throughout the county. And so I look forward to a wider discussion about what the policy is as it relates to our responsibility on the orderly growth within our boundaries as a county.
Commissioner Craig.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing it forward in the robust discussion. I brought it up at the last meeting just specifically because of the county's ag mitigation plan that they're working on. And it's my understanding it's coming to the county like next month, it's coming quickly if I'm not mistaken. So it was important for us to have the discussion. My concern is that LAFCO is speaking relatively firmly on a 2 to 1 ag mitigation with no exemptions through this countywide ag ordinance. And it's contradictory to what some of the cities are trying to accomplish. I actually strongly agree with Commissioner Velasquez that I do think in order for LAFCO to move forward with their recommendations at the county level, they should be engaging the Salinas Valley cities to figure out what is most relevant and available and what we're capable of producing, particularly for housing. I mean, Commissioner Oglesby is absolutely right. When the city of Salinas has multiple families in single family homes. We have requirements to build housing. The 2-to-1 ag mitigation is not feasible in some areas. And so it's surprising to me that LAFCO is coming in hot with that recommendation. So that's where my concern comes in. It's contradictory to what I'm trying to accomplish as a mayor for my city. I think it's contradictory to what some of the other people here are trying to accomplish. I certainly understand that ag land, me of all people, understands that ag land is incredibly valuable, but we also have to be realistic about the expectations that the state is putting on us to build housing. Thank you.
I'm going to run out and open this up for public comment. Do we have anybody from the public?
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Brinton. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Salinas. And I really want to echo the appreciation for the robust conversation. And I want to represent the Salinas Valley cities and say we would like to invite LAFCO staff to come to the next city mayor meeting along with representatives from the county and the Ag Commission to join together with community development staff to continue this discussion. I think we all have the objective of having a clear path forward and really understanding what the processes and policies are to facilitate proper growth in our county. It is a balancing act. And we would like to continue the conversation that really focuses what are the ratios, when is it appropriate to have exemptions, as well as who determines where and the quality of the land that is being acquired for mitigation and timing too. That does have a big impact on the ability of future development if the timing is at entitlement versus when the project is going to go forward. So again, just want to thank you for starting this conversation, and we invite you to come to our August 28th meeting to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, Megan.
Good afternoon. My name is Megan Hunter. I'm the city manager for the city of Soledad. And I did want to address a couple of things that did come up during the conversation. First of all, I did want to acknowledge that Kate and Darren have been very gracious in meeting with us, and we definitely appreciate that. We also met with the Ag Land Trust. And I think there's a couple of things as this commission looks at the 2-to-1 ratio to think about. And I also wanted to see if Darren could go to the slide with the different mitigations outlined in the ratios. As many of you know, Monterey County has a housing crisis. It's extreme. We have overcrowding in the South Salinas communities and also in Salinas. And in order to meet our RHNA numbers, we've already looked at our housing element. The Miramonte project is necessary in order to meet our RHNA numbers. I don't know if you could go to the slide with the ratios. A 2-to-1 mitigation measure will make it very untenable to provide that housing that is needed for our jurisdictions. Just so you know, we did have a conversation with the Ag Land Trust to find out what the in lieu fee would potentially be. They're mentioning $15,000 to $20,000 per acre. Now, in terms of the future growth area in the city of Salinas, when that was annexed, it was $750 per acre for ag mitigation. So you can see what we're looking at. And then in terms of the Miramonte project, it's a little bit of a moving target. if you can see in that slide, it indicates that the mitigation would be 462 acres. I'm very concerned that there's a discussion that it could be more than 1-to-1, a greater than a 1-to-1 ag mitigation. We are working on the assumption that it would be 1-to-1. The other thing that was a little concerning is, what do? We want to work with Ag Land Trust and with LAFCO staff, but what do we do if we can't come to an agreement? Does this land in sort of perpetuity where we can't move forward with the project? We are not in agreement on the suitability of the ag mitigation that we identified. We definitely want to work with LAFCO staff to make sure that this can move forward. But if not, what do we do? Can we come before this board? We'd like to see if you would be willing to schedule a meeting for Soledad to come back to discuss the ag mitigation, or at least to update you on what we're proposing. So that's a request that I have in some materials regarding the ag mitigation, the conservation easement that we're looking at right now. So thank you. And we look forward to continuing to work with LAFCO staff and the board. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Megan. Anybody else from the public?
Sure. My name is Brent Slama with Brent Slama Consulting, and I'm a contract planner currently for the city of Gonzales and the city of Greenfield. And you recall I was here 6 months ago passionately fighting for housing in the Salinas Valley as this previous city manager of Soledad. My successor said it so well. I stand by 100% what she just said about what's going on in Soledad. It's an impediment to housing. This process is becoming an impediment to housing. The fact they're going to have to ask for an extension means you can't put houses on the ground. And that's a problem. I want to acknowledge staff. They did a great job on the staff report. They covered everything. I mean, we've been doing this for so many years. I was there in the mid 2000s. I've been here with Kate talking about ag mitigation, and it's been a work in process. And at that time, there were commissioners that were definitely pushing for easements to control where cities could grow. And that was the purpose of doing that, was to put cities in their place, I think, in many cases in the South County. In the city of Gonzales, I'm currently under contract working on 2 projects, as Darren mentioned, the Cooler and the Vista Lucia project. What we're asking for is consistency in the process. We have committed to ag mitigation. All the cities that have MOAs have committed to doing ag mitigation. And so it's, how do we do that? And I think, we work, and I've worked with Kate for many years on trying to put each individual project together. And each individual project is special and separate. There's a huge difference between 1-to-1 and 2-to-1. And especially when the developer doesn't own the land, flexibility is great, but that means it's often vague. No cities that I'm aware of in the Salinas Valley are willing to go 2-for-1. That's just not going to happen. We would like to see LAFCO respect to the existing MOAs that we've come up with the county that talk about a 1-to-1 ratio. One of the comments said, it's not binding on LAFCO. Well, if it's not binding the MOA between the city and the county on LAFCO, what's the point of the MOA? The MOA has significant commitments that the cities are offering. We're agreeing to ag mitigation. We're agreeing to stop growth in 3 directions of our cities to go in one particular direction. If we make those commitments, we would like LAFCO to honor our ag mitigation commitments. Flexibility is great, but sometimes it's vague. And to Commissioner Oglesby's point, what do you want us to do? What do you want us as cities to do? The project that's coming forward for Gonzales is on the record saying that agricultural facilities should be exempt. But we have a letter that says you need to mitigate. So the developer's offering to mitigate. It's an impediment to housing. Paying at the annexation represents millions of dollars, and asking development to deal with easements and finding easements is not what developers are meant to do. They need to find a process. They need to find a certainty in this process. All other fees that are paid at the time when you develop the property, when you tear up the farmland, not years before. So just once again, ask you to respect the process. We're very interested to work with you, very interested to work on these projects. I look forward to coming back specifically on the Cooler project here in a few months to meet with you specifically about those issues. But in the big picture, we would just like direction generally on what you want us to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been made aware that we need to vacate this room in the next 5 to 10 minutes. We have another meeting right behind us. So it's kind of the pleasure of the commission where we take it from here.
Could I,
Okay. Anybody on Zoom that would want to speak under public comment?
Just talking to the IT support, could you remove the timer so I can see who's on Zoom, please?
well,
Thank you. Yes, we have a hand raised from Armida. Would you please lower, unmute and give your comment?
Armida, we have 2 minutes.
I'll make it very fast. This is actually not Armida. It's Chris Steinbrunner. Armida is an employee. I guess it's her Zoom account. I just wanted to very quickly reiterate my support for the comments I've heard from the commissioners today. As a member of the public, I think it's about time for the commissioners to take a stronger role in setting policy. That is your prerogative, is what you were appointed to do. I'm worried that that some of these policies are being used to try to stop and slow development at a time when we need the housing and we're under state mandate to do so. I'm not saying that staff is trying to do that, but there are certainly people out there who are, and it's very damaging to our community. So I'll keep it short, stop here, but I am very much supportive of the comments I've heard from commissioners today.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else from the public? Yes, sir.
Chair.
Oh, excuse me.
No hands raised on Zoom at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
I'm project manager for the Miramonte subdivision. I just want to make one correction regarding our proposal for the agricultural preservation easement. There is a fundamental difference. Okay, thank you. And that is that at the time, back in December, we were proposing to phase in the annexation. So if we were going to have 125 acres on our first final map, then we would go for 125 acres of easement. So we've agreed at the direction of commission to do all 462 acres. So that is a major difference in our proposal. So
thank you. Commissioner Craig.
Yeah, I know we're pressed for time. I'm just wondering if perhaps, I know it sounds like LAFCO and LAFCO staff is going to be meeting with the Salinas Valley city managers.
Yep.
I'm wondering if it might be appropriate to make the request of LAFCO and staff to at least communicate to the county while they're working feverishly on their ag mitigation plan, maybe to pump the brakes until that meeting occurs, pump the brakes in the context of what LAFCO has already presented as what's acceptable, to maybe take it back a half step and say, we really should be checking with the Salinas Valley cities, and we'll get back to you on what we think is a more appropriate and broader approach to what LAFCO's recommendations are.
But at no time would this affect Soledad's annexation. They need to move forward.
It's essentially the county ag mitigation plan is going light speed right now. I think it's coming in August. Is it coming in August? Do you know? September?
Commissioner, I can help you on that front. I believe the next meeting of the ad hoc committee of the Ag Advisory Committee is now set for July 10th.
Actually, I believe they moved it to
August. It just got,
They
that
canceled
meeting
July.
just got canceled. So the Ag ad hoc committee now is not meeting again until roughly mid-August.
Do you know when
which
it's going
means
to the soups though?
That would be towards the end of the year, I think, because it would first need to go to the full Ag Advisory Committee, and then the Planning Commission, and then the County Board of Supervisors. So that process won't even start till late in the fall. Well, till the fall, I think.
I think it would be, so what I'm trying to communicate though, is I think it would be important to communicate with the county that LAFCO needs to meet with the Salinas Valley cities in order to have a better and broader understanding of what ag mitigation looks like so that we can be successful. Right now, LAFCO is on record with the county in indicating 2-for-1 with no exemptions. And I'd like for that to actually be communicated and addressed at the county level, that actually, hang on a moment. We need to back up a half step and meet with you have all the top brass in the room right now. I've got city manager, you have 2 city managers, a former city manager. I think it's really important to maybe have a more broad discussion before we move forward at the county level with the ag mitigation plan.
Commissioner Leffel.
Mr. Chair, so in lieu of, and along with that, I believe that it is time since 2010 that maybe this commission take a look at changes that have happened throughout the state and in our region, particularly, because one of the things that is not ever, to me, taken into consideration enough is the fire hazards that we have in our county, and that we cannot build on slopes, and we cannot build in wooded areas, and we cannot do this, and we cannot do that. We have got to provide some housing. We've got to provide some economic opportunities for people. We've got innovative practices that have happened in agriculture with vertical farming and indoor farming. We've got much more rabid safety rules on agriculture. So it seems to me that it is time that this commission not be confined by somebody else's meeting coming in, but that we have a meeting that is important enough that we all commit to the time, that we sit down. And I believe it should be after the meeting with the Salinas cities, so that all of that information is gathered. But this is the entire county. This isn't just the peninsula. It's not just the agriculturally surrounded cities. So I believe it's really important. And I think that if we don't take the time to do this and do this right, we're going to continue to get bad reporting, or we're going to have things out in letters that somebody took one way and somebody meant another way. I think we need to sit down and we have to set some policy, because what was policy 25 years ago, to me, that doesn't work today. If you look at all the changes in the world of how we're doing solar, we're doing wind, we're doing this, we're doing that, LAFCO hasn't changed anything. LAFCO's just going along kind of like the way it always did. So for me, it's time, and I will feel very irresponsible as a commissioner if I don't push for us to take a look at our policies and make them stated so that people know. Because I think it was said, well, we don't want to get in the middle of what we've got going. But the point is they are in the middle of it and they can adapt to it now. Soledad, sorry, you're on your own because we voted and gave you the rules. But also, I believe that it should not be the responsibility of one person to decide when something is perfect and ready to go.
Fair and equitable.
Because I think we represent the entire county and the people who have elected us in one way or another. And I think it's really important that we take that responsibly and give it the time that is needed. And that's the last I'll say.
Can would you entertain the motion to continue this discussion to our August meeting?
I will make that motion, and I will say that I believe that we need to have we need to really sit down and talk seriously about what the policy of LAFCO should be going forward to meet the needs of our communities. And can we please have that slide that we didn't have?
I will second her motion.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. To continue the discussion, do we have any more vote? Yes. We're just going to continue the discussion to our August meeting. We have to get out of here. The sheriff's going to show up at the door any minute.
Yeah, no, and I just want to say, we can continue the discussion, but I think the county's moving forward with their ag mitigation plan. I think it's important for us to weigh in and to Commissioner Oglesby's point is that for us to really be able to come back and have some policies and be able to provide some direction, because if we wait until August and we can continue the discussion, but I think it has to be really based on policies to be able to have this board provide comments also to the county's Ag Commission subcommittee, where we stand, what our policies are, what we are going to move forward with.
So, but if through the chair, we're already on record LAFCO's already on record with the county's ag mitigation plan. So that's why I'm asking, like, hey, can we maybe communicate to them that we need to have that conversation with the Salinas Valley cities?
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor.
On the question, I think Commissioner Craig makes a good point. She makes an excellent point. If we're on record saying a statement that we're not sure we're finished with that statement because we just continue the conversation, then why would we let that statement continue to be out there? And so that's the issue I want you guys to think about. I don't know if there's a way to, like she said, pull that back, but the motion, and it seems like it's going to pass, is to continue the conversation about our reflection on what is the policy. And I take 30 more seconds. If we're going to be strong enough to tell the county that they can adopt what they want, but we're not bound by it, well, then fine. Then fine, let that statement go forward. But if it comes back here, we can't be bound by what the county agrees to if we're not strong enough to weigh in now before they make that decision. That's not fair to them. But if we're saying we're not bound by the county, then okay, we'll decide at our next meeting.
Mayor Leffel, would you accept a friendly amendment to include a letter to the county stating from LAFCO that we are currently reviewing the policies and procedures and that LAFCO staff will be meeting with South County cities, Salinas Valley cities over ag mitigation, and that we will continue LAFCO on record will continue the discussion with the county after that meeting has occurred.
Okay.
I would accept that.
Thank you.
And also, mine was not just to have a discussion. Mine was that we are going to set policy. I'm not wanting to just discuss this with all of you, although I love all of you, but I believe that we really need to set policy because it's fair to our staff. Then they know what they can say and what they can do. And it's not just all over the board.
Yeah.
I think that motion means set for action then.
Yes,
Okay.
I believe that we need to have action.
Yeah. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Nays? Any nays? No nays. Motion passes. Can we adjourn?
Yes.
I have been, and for the record, I just want everyone to know that on the Housing and Community Development website, there is an ag conservation mitigation program landing page with contact information for staff who's been involved. There's a long history of meetings that have been held to include all of the South County cities, City of Salinas, multiple meetings with staff, the Farm Bureau, the Grower Shipper Association, groundwater sustainability agencies, building industry partners, and many, many more. So I think to say that this is just being, brought down a railroad track is not a fair or appropriate statement. The conversation and the work that the county planning staff have been doing on this goes back years and includes a wide variety of stakeholders. So anyone who's interested or who's watching, who wants to participate or engage or read any of the past meeting history, minutes, presentations, I encourage you to just do a quick Google search. It'll take you to that page. You can get all the context and background and make sure that you're on the mailing list for any future updates. So I think the other thing I just wanted to make sure that we were clear about as we move forward, since I didn't get a chance to engage in the conversation, was, we wear multiple hats in this space, and absolutely we bring our jurisdictional responsibilities and the heavy obligation to fulfill our RENA obligations within our own communities into this room. We also have an obligation to, uphold the LAFCO duties that are here. And so the conversation to balance that, I think, is really important, clearly. And our developers and our cities, like, if we can't say this is the clear path, and we're just going to keep making you juggle things and the balls keep changing, that's no way to move forward either. So I'm supportive of continuing the conversation, knowing that we do have to balance the disparate needs that exist in our community. But for anyone who's interested, please do engage in the ag mitigation plan that the county is working on.
In banking, they have a saying, there's no more than one way to say no. You just drag it out till they go away.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams, did you have something you want to say? Okay, thank you.
Move to table the remaining items or continue to the next meeting and adjourn the meeting.
It's been moved and I'll second. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.